Martin Hannett, overproduced by 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 Martin Hannett.
Hello and welcome to this melt season update, which will be very short, and it will be short because it's really not that much to say. It's all very safe and low melt figures. We have 2 new weeks of sea ice volume melt and 2 new weeks of sea ice extent melt in the Arctic, and yeah, it's a bit more colorful down here in the extent section, but up here in the volume, these 2 weeks for all the years tracked here are, let's say, boring yellow and greens, and you would have to have magenta, this level melt here, on a weekly basis for 2021 in order to get to a blue ocean event or ice-free situation. So let's just skip to extent, shall we? So you have over 3 of these years listed. We have like red level melt, but not for this year, not for 2021. And down here in the weekly section, you have one interesting week, which is last week for sea ice extent in 2012. That's like, you know, last year's snow and all that, or last decade's snow. So up here in 2021, we had, apart from the 130 cliffhanger that we ended on last time, we had one more red and then a refreeze. And other than that, mostly green and light blue, so very, very low melt in terms of extent. And the only interesting thing to say about that is that 2020 last year also had a series of greens and light blues, you know, sort of quiet before the storm, before launching out into at least somewhat more interesting final dash to the end of the melt season. And we shouldn't forget that 2020, by doing that, or by doing what it did all year, ended up the lowest ever on record for sea ice extent from the JAXA, the Japanese Space Agency. So yeah, we might have a couple of weeks now in front of us of very rapid melt in the Arctic for 2021, if this is something to go by, you know, if there is a pattern here of flattening out and then after it spreads out and sort of gets some time and space to melt out in, or maybe go south, different directions of south from the North Pole, because the entire coast up in the Arctic is south of the Central Arctic, right? So that may be happening, but, you know, as I said above with the volume, we need this magenta level, the hardest melt on record ever, and we need that every day, every week for the rest of the melt season, so not very likely. Okay, thank you.
And I think tipping points are a really important issue that we need to talk about, because years and years ago, all the big NGOs used to talk about the danger of crossing tipping points. Now that we've crossed a multitude of them, they don't want to talk about it.
Well, yeah, you can hardly blame them. Once the self-reinforcing patterns that are truly out of our control, once you become aware of them, then you just sort of focus your attention on other things because there's not a damn thing we can do about some of that stuff.
Yeah, but I take issue with the not talking about it. I think we have an obligation to the youth to tell the truth.
Yes, yes.
It's really important. If your house was on fire, would you want me to walk by and shut the fuck up? Or would you like me to bang on your bedroom window and wake you up?
Mm-hmm.
And I think tipping points are a really important issue that we need to talk about, because years and years ago, all the big NGOs used to talk about the danger of crossing tipping points.
Right.
Now that we've crossed a multitude of them, they don't want to talk about it.
Mm-hmm. And I think tipping points are a really important issue that we need to talk about, because years and years ago, all the big NGOs used to talk about the danger of crossing tipping points. Now that we've crossed a multitude of them, they don't want to talk about it.
And I think tipping points are a really important issue that we need to talk about, because years and years ago, all the big NGOs used to talk about the danger of crossing tipping points. Now that we've crossed a multitude of them, they don't want to talk about it.
Dr. Ed Hawkins, welcome to the Climate Pod.
Well, thank you for having me.
The IPCC recently released its new report, Climate Change 2021, the Physical Science Basis. Why are assessments like the report released today an essential part of the conversation on climate change?
So it's important to realize that climate change is an enormous endeavor, and the science behind it is an enormous endeavor. We have to come together every few years and assess our understanding and assess our knowledge, because that is what is asked for by the policymakers. And so the IPCC isn't the scientists, it's actually the 195 governments that make up the IPCC. And so the IPCC isn't the scientists, it's actually the 195 governments that make up the IPCC.
And so the IPCC isn't the scientists, it's actually the 195 governments that make up the IPCC.
And so the IPCC isn't the scientists, it's actually the 195 governments that make up the IPCC.
And so the IPCC isn't the scientists, it's actually the 195 governments that make up the IPCC.
This is a crisis I knew had to come, destroying the balance I'd kept, doubting, unsettling and turning around, wondering what will come next. Is this the world you wanted to live? I was foolish to ask for so much. Without the protection, infancy's gone. It all falls apart.
So it's one of those things that's hard to describe unless you see it. But again, like, these are huge icebergs that, can be the size of skyscrapers. So it's an enormous volume of ice. And the reason we should care is because at some point, these glaciers, the amount of ice they're draining from the ice sheet was balanced by snowfall on the ice sheet. So you kind of have these two processes that are balancing each other. So you have snowfall and melt on the surface, and then the amount of ice that's draining at the edge. So just the fact that there's icebergs doesn't necessarily mean a bad thing is going on. It's actually a normal part of an ice sheet process. However, starting around 2000, the amount of ice that these glaciers are draining has sped up. It kind of jumped up because there's been a lot of retreat, and these glaciers sped up and they're draining rapid amounts of ice from the ice sheet. Now it's extremely unlikely that the amount of snow that falls every year on Greenland will ever be able to balance what the ice sheet is losing at the edges. So what the paper colleagues and I recently came out with is that we're finding, even if we would have a really hefty, healthy snowfall year, that's still not going to be enough to balance the rate of ice loss we're losing at the edges through these big glaciers. And so that's a concern for us because we expect the ice sheet to continue then to lose mass going forward in the future.
And isn't it fair to say that even if we do key things to deal with climate crisis, which we have to do for a whole bunch of other reasons. I mean, we've spent $265 billion in 2 years ago just to clean up after 3 storms. Hurricane Irma, which had the first recorded winds over 185 miles an hour for 24 hours. We had Hurricane Harvey, which dropped more water on Houston, Texas in 5 days than goes over Niagara Falls in an entire year, just to give people a sense of the amount of water. And then, of course, Maria in Puerto Rico. So we spent $265 billion just cleaning up after 3 storms. Folks, we keep hearing people say, oh, it's going to be too expensive. We can't do all these things. Mm-hmm. We're spending unbelievable amounts of money because we're not doing other things. Now, if we were to move to mitigate, let's say there is a massive effort to hold the Earth's temperature to around 2 degrees centigrade, which is what scientists have said we need to do. It is a fact, is it not, that because of the CO2 that's already up there and the cascading level of melting and other negative inputs, that's going to continue for a period of time, isn't it? I mean, some of these things are just baked into where we're going.
Right. And that's, I kind of think the ice sheet's almost like a steam engine. They have taken kind of a while to start responding to warming, but then once you get this engine going, you can't just shut off warming and expect the ice sheets to recover like that. I mean, these are really slow moving, slow responding systems. So once you get things going, I mean, we would expect it to, like, let's say tomorrow we were able to cut emissions, go carbon neutral, because of how long carbon dioxide stays in the atmosphere and how long these glaciers take to regrow once they retreat back so far. I mean, you're kind of committed to decades to hundreds of years of ice loss. However, that's not to say you shouldn't bother trying to change now. It just really underscores.
Why? What do you say to the person who says, oh my God, they throw their hands up in the air and say, time to binge watch my favorite show or something? Mm-hmm. What do you say to people is the reason to move and to move rapidly to deal with this?
I would say first that I can empathize a little bit with feeling overwhelmed and kind of that sentiment that, well, what can we even do? I mean, it seems like change is so inevitable. I'm, so small, like what can we really do to change that? So I understand that feeling of just being, flushed and overwhelmed. But I mean, we are making decisions now for hundreds of years into the future. And so it's really hard to get people to kind of grab onto changes that are occurring after our lifetimes. But I mean, we're kind of at a pivotal moment that we can change the outcome of, how dramatically climate change affects humans on Earth. And so it's really, rather than getting discouraged, I think kind of harness that that energy to be like, okay, the time is actually now. Like, this is the moment that we can make these really profound changes if we just start aggressively, confronting this challenge head on.
And so help people to understand, okay, we got to confront it. I'm there. What can I do? What's my individual contribution to confronting it? Besides voting, people need to vote.
I was going to say vote. Individual actions I think are important. And I've noticed, for me, I've been more successful with trying not to spread yourself too thin. Like, find something you actually enjoy doing, and that finding your strengths. Like, okay, this is something I'm good at that is also making a positive impact. But even more than, I think we're kind of at the point that what we need to do extends even beyond individual actions. Not saying those aren't important, but we need to kind of have collective group policy changes. Like, we need to confront this as not just as a nation, but I mean as a global population. I mean, this is a global problem. So a lot of the most impactful changes and ways to prevent the greatest amount of harm that could come from climate change would be more like collective action. So even if it's as simple as talking, sharing science that you're learning about climate change, just making it more of like this, not so much of a debate, because it really isn't a debate. So having everyone sort of on board that at least we're acknowledging that this is a crisis to tackle would be a huge step forward compared to kind of where we're at right now, at least in the United States. So it would make us scientists' jobs a lot easier if we're producing the science and it's actually then ingested and taken seriously, and then we put policy changes in place to act accordingly, rather than intentionally muddy the waters. It makes it kind of difficult to get action going.
Do you find any level of consensus among your peers, among folks in the scientific community, regarding what those steps ought to be? What are the most consequential steps? What steps are just elementary to helping to solve this problem that we need to do really rapidly? What would you say, I guess, about order of priority?
I would say, as far as consensus, I mean, it seems the real obvious one is a transition of our energy infrastructure to go more obviously away from fossil fuels and into the renewable energy sector. It's on its face. I mean, this is a necessity. This is the way forward. And I think it can be done in a way that's economically beneficial as well. I mean, there is a lot of potential here for the United States to really be a leader in some of these fields. I mean, you have a lot of potential in areas of the eastern coast for like offshore wind. I mean, there's a lot of, especially for jobs as well, like there's a lot of really right places for the United States to thrive if we, commit to make this transition away from fossil fuels, because it's not a long-term, like we can't stay in our current
Let me underscore that. I welcome what you just said, because you're right on target. And there are 2 or 3 major areas where people need to take steps. One of them is how we power our homes, how we power electricity, how do we heat our homes, and so forth. And for many, many years we've depended on oil and gas, and now we need to transition to renewable, to solar, to wind, to hydro, to various different fuels. But the truth is, people really need to focus on this, particularly as we struggle to come out of COVID-19 and what it's done to the economy, to get the economy moving again and do what we need to do for climate. We actually have an opportunity that's unparalleled, because American infrastructure is old and inadequate. We haven't invested in it in recent years. Dwight D. Eisenhower proposed building the interstate highway system. And many of our power plants are antiquated, they're old, they're part of old systems that don't even connect state to state and around the country. So we don't very effectively transport our energy around our own nation. in the building out of that smart grid infrastructure, there are literally millions of jobs to be created, which are high-paying, good-paying jobs. Before COVID-19 hit, the fastest growing job in America was solar power technician. The second fastest growing job was wind turbine technician. I mean, that is the future. And the faster we embrace it and break ground in it, frankly, the faster we bring our colleges and universities together to be doing the research and the development and so forth, and develop the new products of the future, then the faster we're the world's leader and we put people to work and we encourage a virtuous economy. So this is a great opportunity. People should not be scared of this. People should be welcoming it and embracing it. And it's an opportunity for us to modernize our nation, have first-rate transportation systems, cleaner energy, less disease, less cancer, better health. I mean, the benefits of this are just gigantic. And for some reason, scientists, experts have been discredited in our society. It just, I wonder if you sit around at all with your friends who are choosing this career of science and kick yourselves and say, what the hell is going on? Why do people not believe that 2 and 2 is 4? And you know, so on. How do you react to that?
I've had a lot of success when I'm actually sitting down with a person face to face and having a discussion. I think it's easier when you're on the internet and people are kind of overwhelmed. Individuals are overwhelmed with misinformation that it's hard to break through that sometimes. But yeah, it is frustrating that there's a concerted effort to you know, muddy the scientific message or try to seem like there is this 50-50 debate. It is discouraging, but I think, you know, I hope that there's momentum that people are coming on to climate science, sort of understanding that this isn't up for debate. Not that it's I don't want to say, of course, it's not a good thing, all the terrible things with the climate going on right now with fires and hurricanes and everything, but I think people are waking up to it because it's in our face. It's less abstract for us here in the United States. I mean, it's affecting us right now, and I think people are slowly opening up their eyes to that and being more receptive to the message. So I feel undertones of momentum shift, and I hope that's not just me trying to be overly optimistic, but I think there is a kind of a pendulum swing happening right now, and people that are really saying, okay, the time is now to, you know, put leaders in place that are going to make the decisions for my family and health and the future generations, to make sure that the United States stays, you know, as healthy as possible and as successful as possible.
Michalea, what other aspects of Greenland would you want to call to people's attention?
Well,
or do you think you've hit it?
So I study, like I said, the glaciers in Greenland. So looking at how rapidly ice is being drained at the edges. It's not just that there's more ice being lost at the edges, but there's also been more surface melt as well. So the actual ice sheet surface it gains snow, but it also can melt. And in a couple really warm years, just within the last decade, almost the entire surface has melted during these warm summers. And so another, you know, area that scientists are working on is understanding how much surface melt we can expect in the future. And just last year, 2019, this was a record-breaking year as far as the total amount of mass lost from the ice sheet. So I think it averages to about 1 million metric tons per minute over the year. So the ice sheet lost a record-breaking amount of mass, a lot of that due to just a huge amount of surface melt. And I actually saw this firsthand last year in Greenland. We were on the ice sheet in early May, and it was a really early start to the melt season. So we don't expect to see melt in early May in Greenland, but we were already seeing those really bright blue melt ponds and rivers, you know, cascading waterfalls off the ice sheet. And so it really shows you from one year to the next, if you have warmer temperatures and really favorable atmospheric conditions for melt, it can really amplify the amount of mass these ice sheets are losing. So it's not just the glaciers, it's also warming air temperatures melting the surface from above as well.
Have you heard any interesting critiques from actual, like, respectable climate scientists?
Yes, I've seen a few threads on Twitter that I really want to have a chance to respond to. It's been just the number. I haven't been able to get back to everyone yet. But, people are like, the idea of tipping points is definitely a tricky concept to navigate. And I understand, like, in the glaciology community, people that study these ice sheets, you really need to toe a line where you see how rapidly these ice sheets are changing, and you want to convey the severity of that without making it seem like, well, there's no point in trying to, do anything about it because all hope is lost, so to speak. So it's, you really want to get across that, wow, this change we're seeing is really profound, without scaring the public into thinking, well, there's nothing that can be done, because that's not the case. We can still control rates of change. But yeah, the critiques have mainly been just, being careful about talking about tipping points and not wanting to make it sound like the whole ice sheet is falling apart, which, like I said, isn't the case, but I can see how sometimes nuances between what scientists, words we use and public, sometimes it can get a little hairy getting that message across.
It's a bleak picture of the Arctic and the world's climate system. Snow and ice cover some parts of the North Pole all year round. The Polar Stern research ship and its team of scientists spent a year frozen here, drifting with the ice flow. The early findings from their research show that the Arctic ice is thinning, and that in spring 2020, the sea ice retreated faster than ever before. In autumn, the ice refroze later than usual. The fear is that the summer sea ice in the Arctic could soon disappear completely. Scientists say this is a warning the world can't ignore.
That shows how dramatic the changes in the Arctic are, and that we are about to completely lose the summer Arctic sea ice. And that is one of the important tipping points in Earth's climate system.
The team compared their findings with 130 years worth of records about the ice. The scientists say the Earth is close to the point of irreversible climate change. But there is still time.
We need to act quickly now. We need to reduce our emissions of greenhouse gases drastically, and we need to do that during the next decade. By the mid of the century, at the latest, we need to be climate neutral.
Months after this happy homecoming in Germany last year, the results are now out. Scientists hope the world will take action on climate change before it's too late.
Ja, vi ska hålla oss kvar kring klimatet. För den här sommaren har vi pratat mycket om klimat, inte bara på grund av översvämningar och värmeböljor, utan också för att FNs klimatpanel just släppte en rapport i förra veckan med en mycket dyster prognos för framtiden.
Ja, precis. Om vi inte radikalt ändrar vårt sätt att leva på jorden, så menar somliga klimataktivister och forskare att vi kanske aldrig kan få bukt med det globala klimathotet. Och flera menar också att det redan gått så långt att vi rör oss mot så kallade tipping points, alltså tillstånd och nivåer där vi inte längre kan vända utvecklingen till det bättre.
Hur verkligt detta scenario är, det ska vi diskutera nu med våra gäster, professorerna Line Gordon och Mikael Tjernström. Varmt välkomna båda två.
Tack ska du ha.
Ja, de här tipping points som man talar om då, alltså vad innebär de mer konkret och hur kan man exemplifiera hur det faktiskt slår mot klimatet? Om vi börjar med dig.
Nej, men jag tänker att en tipping point är när man har en väldigt liten påverkan men det får extremt stora konsekvenser. Och i det här ser vi att det finns tipping points i en rad olika typer av system. Skogar som kan bli savanner, korallrev som vi förlorar koraller när de blir algdominerade eller blekta. Sjöar som går från att vara övergödda till att eller från att vara klara till att bli övergödda etc.
Och då menar man att när man väl har hamnat där, då går det inte att liksom ta tillbaka den utvecklingen?
Det finns olika typer av tipping points, men det är mycket svårare att komma tillbaka än vad det var att flippa över då till det här nya stadiet. Så att det är mycket mer kostsamt och kräver mycket mer investeringar för att kunna ta sig tillbaka. Och en del är såklart irreversibla också. Det vill säga att man inte kan få tillbaka det man hade innan.
Hur ser du på tipping points?
Jag tycker att tipping points är ett begrepp som har använts alldeles för mycket och alldeles för vårdslöst i debatten. Alla kaotiska system, som klimatsystemet är ett kaotiskt system, har just den egenskapen att ibland så har en liten förändring i någonting en stort utfall. Att det blir en stor förändring beroende på en liten förändring i forcingen eller något sånt. Så att det är en naturlig del av systemet. Men i de allra flesta fall så är de här tipping points inte irreversibla.
När du säger kaotiskt system där, Mikael, kan du förklara lite kort vad kaotiskt system?
Ett kaotiskt system kännetecknas, nästan alla system i naturen är kaotiska och de kännetecknas just av detta. Att man ändrar på koldioxidhalten till exempel lite grann och så ökar temperaturen lite grann. Men sen så händer det någonting dramatiskt i systemet och någonting försvinner.
Fjärilseffekten?
Ja, fjärilseffekten är ett populärt namn på
att en liten grej här kan leda till ödesdigra konsekvenser.
Men i de allra flesta fall, åtminstone i klimatsystemet, så är de här tipping pointsen inte irreversibla. Det betyder att om vi bara kunde sänka temperaturen på jorden igen, då kommer isen i Arktis tillbaka, då kommer isen på Grönland tillbaka. Och då handlar det inte om ifall det händer eller inte, utan det handlar om hur lång tid vi måste vänta på att det ska hända. Och det är olika för olika system. För isen i Arktis till exempel så kanske det handlar om 10 år.
Just det.
Isen på Grönland kanske det handlar om 500 år.
Okay.
Och kanske är det en skillnad här också, för jag har en bakgrund som ekolog och du är mer bakgrund inom klimat. Och inom ekosystem, de är också såna här komplexa kaotiska system. Det gör att när de väl tippar, då sätter det igång nya typer av återkopplingar. Och det är det här som gör att det är så svårt att bryta det mönstret. Så ofta så kan det gå att få tillbaka, men det är väldigt svårt och det kräver väldigt mycket investeringar. Och därav är det mycket bättre att vi minskar risken för att de tippar, så att vi gör det innan den här tröskeln har skett.
Just
Istället för att vi ska sätta oss i ett läge där vi hamnar i stora problem och stora svårigheter.
Men vi har redan värmt upp jorden med drygt 1 grad. Och för alla praktiska ändamål så är det irreversibelt. Det kommer att ta hundratals år innan den uppvärmningen har kommit tillbaka till sitt ursprungsläge igen. Ifall vi slutar släppa ut koldioxid. Och då frågar jag mig, är det en tipping point? Eller är det någonting annat då? Så att jag hamnar liksom i den situationen att ändra så är hela klimatfrågan en enda gigantisk tipping point. Och då har vi redan nått det stadiet. Då har vi redan tippat.
Ni är eniga om forskningen så att säga, men lite olika hur man benämner
tipping points. Det finns tipping
point.
points, absolut. Och det finns irreversibla tipping points. Om man utrotar en djurart, då kommer den aldrig mer tillbaka.
Då är det kört.
Det är ett solklart fall. Men när det gäller de flesta komponenterna i klimatsystemet, som Golfströmmen, isen på Grönland, havsisen i Arktis, alla de systemen är i balans eller obalans med varandra. Och är det så att man låter bli att peta det här systemet så inrättas en balans så småningom. Sänker vi temperaturen på jorden, kommer det ta väldigt lång tid att göra det. Ja, då kommer isen i Arktis tillbaka. Det har vi ju sett. Inlandsisarna under istiderna till exempel försvinner under interglacialerna och kommer tillbaka igen. Va? Det, är liksom, det finns en finit mängd vatten och den måste ligga någonstans.
Och ett problem där är ju att det kanske är alltså det går att få tillbaka. Men om vi tänker på hur otroligt kort tid som vi människor faktiskt lever på den här planeten, vi som individer, så vi kan inte uppleva den återkomsten, utan då har vi byggt upp ett samhälle som kan finnas inom det som finns idag, inte det som då gör att den här de här tipping pointsen har skett.
Nej,
liksom. Och då, så för vårt samhälle, det kan ju kollapsa även om klimatet är reversibelt.
Absolut.
Och oavsett då definitionen av vad vår definition här i den här studien är på tipping points. Vi ser en ny studie som faktiskt Greta Thunberg hänvisade till Twitter på häromdagen. Att vi har nått, nära att nå och kanske till och med har nått flera tipping points. Ja, vad ligger sanningen egentligen? Alltså hur nära är vi att nå fram till några sådana här som är i alla fall irreversibla på generationer?
Jag tycker det allra viktigaste här, det är att hålla oss till det vi vet att vi vet. Och det är fullt tillräckligt. Vi vet att om vi fortsätter att öka koldioxidhalten i atmosfären så fortsätter temperaturen att stiga. Och då kommer isen i Arktis att försvinna, havsytan kommer att stiga, isen på Grönland kommer att smälta. Det är saker som vi vet. alla den här diskussioner om tipping points och i synnerhet diskussioner om multipla tipping points där de skulle på något sätt samverka med varandra och åstadkomma någon slags nytt klimattillstånd som vi aldrig skulle komma ur. Det är ju bara spekulationer. Det finns inga vetenskapliga belägg för det.
Tundran smälter, släpper ut mer metangas vilket leder till ännu högre temperaturer.
Ja, fast metan bryts ner i atmosfären så allt det metanet är borta på 100 år.
Okej, ja. I 100 år.
Ja, men och under den tiden så hinner vi förlora, ja, men som korallreven till exempel. Och då är de borta. De är borta. Det är en tipping point. De går inte att få tillbaka. Så ja, men det är möjligt att klimatet beter sig på det sättet att det inte går att få tillbaka. Men så mycket av det som vi värdesätter på den här planeten och så mycket som vi behöver för vårt samhälle, det går inte att få tillbaka. Och det kommer vi förlora när klimatet förändras så kraftigt. Så att jag tror att det är otroligt viktigt att ta de här varningarna på allvar och göra vad vi kan för att minska klimatpåverkan. Och där är vi ju helt eniga.
Där är vi helt överens. Och jag vill gärna understryka det. Det är inte alls så att jag förminskar problemet på något sätt. Det är verkligen ett allvarligt problem. Och jag menar att det är fullt tillräckligt allvarligt utan att vi hotar med katastrofscenarios där jorden skulle tippa över någon slags kant och alla skulle dö eller hela systemet skulle på något sätt försvinna. Och det är liksom vi vet ganska mycket om klimatsystemet och vi vet att det finns ett hyfsat linjärt samband mellan hur mycket koldioxid vi släpper ut och hur mycket temperaturen stiger.
Och vi har lite grafik på de globala klimathot som vi ju vet är ett hot mot klimatet. Det var ju mycket av det du nämnde, Mikael. Stigande temperaturer, ökad koldioxidhalt och så vidare och så vidare.
Och då skulle jag vilja lyfta just den här punkten med avsmältning och höjda havsnivåer. För det är ett exempel på den här mismatchen, det här missförhållandet mellan olika tidsskalor. Vi säger det att om vi fortsätter som idag då kommer havsnivåerna att ha stigit kanske till 1 meter i slutet på det här århundradet. Låt oss säga att vi lyckas stabilisera klimatet på 1,5 eller 2 eller kanske 3 grader till 2100. Då kanske havsnivån stiger 1 meter. Det kanske vi kan leva med. Men problemet är att de här glaciärerna de kommer att fortsätta att smälta glatt i 3, 4, 500 år till.
Såklart, ja.
Och då i slutet på 2300 då kommer det att vara 2 eller 3 meters havsnivåhöjning. Därför att de här glaciärerna det tar så lång tid för dem att komma i balans med klimatet så att det kommer att ta hundratals år innan de har hunnit kapp våran jättesnabba uppvärmning. Så det tror jag är kanske det allra största hotet mot samhället är just den höjda
mot mänskligheten.
Ja, och där finns ju också ett exempel på just det här, en låg risk men med extremt hög impact som IPCC lyfter. De säger ju också att 2300 så kan vi inte utesluta att vi kan ha en havsnivåhöjning på 15 meter. 15 meter, det är ju extremt. Och det går inte att utesluta. Det är inte sannolikt att vi hamnar där. Men i och med att man inte riktigt vet och att det just finns en del komplexitet som vi inte vet.
Den här kaotiska som vi talade om i början.
Då måste vi också kunna förstå hur ska vi bygga vårt samhälle för
vi måste förbereda oss för en annan verklighet.
Precis. Jag tänker ibland på det. Jag tror inte att mitt hus kommer brinna ner. Liksom. Det är ganska osannolikt. Men det kan hända och därav så försöker jag minska risken för att det ska brinna ner. Jag investerar i brandalarm så att och vi har en brandkår och vi har försäkringsbolag för att kunna minska risken för att det ska hända. Och om det händer, vad gör vi då? Så måste vi också tänka på det här.
Det finns hur mycket som helst att prata om här. Tackar er för båda för att ni kom hit, Linegården och Mikael Tjernström. Väldigt intressant och illavarslande.
Because the ice must flow.